Dear colleagues, Pardee School and BU students, friends of the Pardee Center. Good afternoon. My name is Jorge Heine, and I direct the Pardee Center for the Study of the Longer Range Future. Let me welcome you for this, the 2025 Anthony Janetos Memorial Distinguished Lecture. This is one of the flagship activities of the Pardee Center, and we are especially honored by today's guest speaker, about which more in a moment. With a quarter of a century of existence, the Pardee Center preceded the founding of the Pardee School, of which it now forms part, and whose 10th anniversary was celebrated last Friday. Both the center and the school were made possible by the generosity of BU alum Fred Pardee, one of this university's most committed donors, and we are dedicated to bringing the world to the BU community. Over the years, on this occasion, on this yearly lecture, we have had some very prominent speakers, including Nobel Prize winner economist Amartya Sen and physicist Freeman Dyson, among others. In the recent past, audiences have benefited from the wisdom of noted Singaporean diplomat and public intellectual Kishore Mahbubani, who addressed the question of, is the Asian century really coming? I still remember him saying, the answer is yes, but I suppose you want to hear a bit more about it. And last year, and I was just talking about that with President Mahuad, we had former Mexican President Ernesto Zedillo addressing another small question, is globalization over? And today, that eminent list of speakers is joined by none other than Jamil Mahuad, the former president of Ecuador. Mr. Mahuad is a Nobel Prize nominee, Nobel Peace Prize nominee for the signing of the Ecuador-Peru Peace Treaty that, as President Clinton remarked, and I quote, resolve the hemisphere's last and oldest source of armed international conflict. President Mahuad is also the recipient of the World Wildlife Fund Gift to the Earth Award. In addition to his many accomplishments, he was mayor of Quito before being president of Ecuador, and has been with Harvard University for over 20 years now, and is a senior fellow at the program of negotiation at Harvard Law School, and teaches at the Executive Education Faculty on Leadership and Negotiation at the Kennedy School. With other former Latin American presidents, he is a member of IDEA, Democratic Initiative of Spain and the Americas, and the Freedom and Democracy Group, as well as of the Latin American Presidential Mission. President Mahuad thus embodies the rare qualities of those men and women who exercise leadership at the highest levels, leading not only the nations, but also bringing peace with other nations, a quality that is even rarer in today's troubled world, marked by major wars and crises of many kinds. President Mahuad has also shown to be able to reflect on his extraordinary experiences and draw the appropriate lessons from them, lessons he shares with his students as well as with the governments he advises. A note about today's lecture. An argument can be made that the topic is not exactly about the longer range future, and I am prepared to accept that. Yet, in a phrase that has been much used recently, as Vladimir Ilyich Lenin put it, and I quote, there are decades when nothing happens, and then there are weeks when decades happen. And that, it seems to me, reflects very well what we have been seeing in the course of the past couple of months. These are days when time has seemingly accelerated, giving us a vertigo-like feeling that makes it even difficult to catch up with everything that is going on. The urgency of the present demands we come up with some answers now. In these especially taxing times, especially trying times in my part of the world, in Latin America, the region was the most affected by the COVID-19 pandemic, with the highest number of fatalities per capita. It also had the biggest economic downturn in 120 years in 2020, with a negative growth of GDP of 6.6%, which was twice the negative growth that the world economy had that year. The region has not yet managed to recover, with some economists warning that the specter of another lost decade may be in the offing. As it happens, and I tell my students, many of whom are here, that timing isn't everything, it's the only thing. Today, Latin American leaders are meeting in Tegucigalpa under the umbrella of CELAC, the Latin American Community Community of Latin American and Caribbean States. President Lula is there, President Sheinbaum from Mexico, other presidents are there to discuss the way forward and see how the region can face the enormous challenges it faces. The region is confronted by difficult choices on issues like US policy on mass deportations, tariffs, the Panama Canal, and trade with Venezuela, to mention only some. The answer on how to proceed is by no means obvious. In many ways, the region finds itself between a rock and a hard place. So, to quote Lenin again, what is to be done? To respond to that question, I suppose you will agree with me that few people are more qualified than President Jamil Mahuad. President, the floor is yours.
First, thank you very much for your introduction. It's a great honor to be invited for this distinguished lecture. And the Pardee Center, in his 20th anniversary, has proved how important are the things that you are doing for the community and for the world. I want to start quoting probably the most influential thinker in Spain in the first part of the 20th century, José Ortega y Gasset. His most famous phrase was, "I am I and my circumstances," meaning you cannot judge a person, an action of that person, if you do not consider the context and the options that person had to choose from. And that is true for continents and for countries. So I would like to invite you to go before COVID and to try to see what was going on in Latin America. This is a demonstration in Brazil. Why did I choose Brazil? The biggest country in Latin America. Bigger than the combination of all the countries in South and Central America, in extension, population, the size of the economy. So it's a real player. We used to call Brazil the United States of South America. Second, because according to the scholars that have studied this phenomenon, it's in Brazil where most of the demonstrations happened between 2011 and 2020. And those demonstrations, in that picture, you have more than 1 million people on the streets. 1 million people. Those demonstrations were popular, massive, diffuse. If you interview those persons that are there, you will not have just one answer about the question why you are here. The motivations are very diffuse. Spontaneous. Can you identify some known leader calling them to come to the streets, you will not find that person. It's very spontaneous, horizontal, unstructured, autonomous, flexible. They can accommodate to the circumstances very easily. No ideologized, no statements. It's just a popular, massive manifestation of protest. Heterogeneous, you have multiple groups with age, gender, occupation, etc. So this makes the situation in Brazil a very important one. But you can see the same in Chile, because Brazil and Chile together represented the big majority of the demonstrations in South America. People are indignant. They are furious. They hate the local, national, and international power structures. Some people hate the structure, the establishment. Some others hate the agents that are representing the power. And they can blame individuals by name, or they can blame, using President Milei in Argentina now, to quote unquote, la casta, meaning all of the politicians and all of the part of the structure are responsible and guilty of this thing. So the incumbents, by definition, it doesn't matter if you're from the right, from the left, from the center, but the incumbents are unjust, unfair liars. You offer something and you do not deliver what you have offered. So I have the right, the moral right, to be indignant against that. Now, the methods are different. You can start just with symbolic gestures, like a hunger strike, or rallies, the famous cacerolazos, empty devices where you cook, making the sound that they are empty to protest because the cost of living. Or you can go further and be disruptive. You blockade the streets. Vandalic, the case of Chile was tremendous because they destroyed many metro stations at the same time in a very well orchestrated action. And they demand democracy. Look at that name there. And here comes the first question. What is democracy? I really like the definition of Abraham Lincoln in the famous Gettysburg Address. He didn't pretend to define anything. But when he said that the government of the people, by the people, and for the people should not perish from the earth, many people said this is the definition of the system we call democracy. So from the people means you have an electoral origin. You are voted to occupy the office. You are not a dictator. By the people, in my view, means you will govern using the Constitution and the laws. You are elected to govern with those instruments. You are not an emperor that can do as you wish without respect to these constraints, limits to your power. And for the people means that the quality of life of the population will improve. If you have a president that can check from, by, and for where is the discussion? But that is so difficult to get the three of them that most of the presidents in the world almost are forced to choose two of them and to sacrifice one of them. And this is a terrifying question. When I ask the students, you would be in the office, and you have been elected, and you find that your hands are tied by the laws, and you see that poverty is affecting your people, and you have to sacrifice one of them to accomplish the other two, which one will you sacrifice? And I could feel in the class the terror of making such a decision, because we had been educated learning that the three of them should be respected. In real life, you have different combinations. A person wins an election, so it is from the people, governed by law, and the results of the economy are terrible. So you fail the third one. The quality of life does not improve. Or you have been elected, and the quality of life is very good, but you are very authoritarian. You do not feel constrained by the Constitution and the laws. Or you say, this country needs solutions. I don't care about the origin. I just take power, and once in power, I will respect the laws that I dictate, and the country will improve. And you can classify many of the governments with that kind of thinking. Now, by democracy, the people on the streets want economic and social justice, respect to human rights, legitimate political representation. This is a big problem in the democracies of Latin America right now. Yes, you have elections and you have representatives. And even if the elections are fair and you respect the results and there's no fraud, you still can question if the candidates are real representatives of the majority of the interests of the population. So they say, you do not represent me. I am against you. You are in the incumbent. I don't like you. I don't like your policies, and you do not represent me. How do you change that? If the whole system becomes affected by the same virus. Now, lately, and it started there, you have identity politics. I remember a good friend saying that in one manifestation in Chile, he saw so many flags, Jorge, that every single interest was represented by the flags in the group. He was missing one flag, the Chilean flag, the flag of the country, the flag that will contain all the others. They are very concerned about the environment. So by all of that means democracy. And this is a very telling picture from the problem in Chile. The people want profound political and social transformations. They want solutions to objective problems, jobs, better salaries, the possibility to have a future, etc., etc. But at the same time, they want solutions to subjective problems. It is about, again, identities, about values, and they want both of them. Many times you can hear economists speaking about the problems, and everything is contained in numbers. You can talk about GDP, GDP per capita, Gini coefficient, etc. And those are very good numbers to understand a lot of things, but not all of them. When you have them blending of this, a breeding ground, this is my personal interpretation of what happened in all these countries, because we have this kind of protesters in every country in Latin America. First, a breeding ground. They are poor, they hate the situation, they have been waiting for solutions for many years. The solutions were not what they expected, so they are ready for something. Then you have illegitimate political leaders, and then you have a perception that the corruption is rampant and the immunity protect them, and everything is so unfair that when you come to that situation, any spark can detonate a problem. It can be the street vendor in North Africa that put himself on fire, or it can be, in the case of Chile, the 30 pesos of the photo. It was an increase of 30 pesos in the metro system. And Chile has been a model for many of us in Latin America. Political model. They got a coordination between political parties and were able to govern with stability and plans and with a goal in the future. And the numbers were very good, not only in the economy, the social numbers, the results in poverty alleviation, in health, education. It was a model country for Latin America. And suddenly, because you increase the price of 30 pesos in the price of the ticket, the country goes on fire. And this says it is not 30 pesos. It has been 30 years. We don't want more of this. And many people in Latin America, I was included in the group, were saying, what else they want? We would love to be Chile. It was not good enough for them. Okay. So the digital connectivity helps a lot for these kinds of spontaneous, horizontal demonstrations. Remember the situation in Egypt. And from the Western mentality, many times we love to put nice phrases to describe movements. And we call that the Arab Spring from the Western perspective. The most important student was invited by the Institute of Politics at the Kennedy School. And he came and gave talks about how he organized the grassroots in Egypt. He said, you used social media. He said, I didn't. I was put in jail the first day of the demonstrations. When I came out of jail, everything has passed. Everything has occurred. But it was because of the social media. He said, no, it happened because the situation was very unfair. Without social media, probably would have taken more time, more difficulties, but it would have happened anyway. So, while this was happening in Latin America, we had a presidential election in the United States. And I remember this debate between Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton in Austin, Texas. Because the debate was announced as the debate about Latin America. You can imagine the illusion and the emotion when we hear those words. They are going to talk about us. We need to be there. We need to listen. It was a great debate. Two brilliant minds. The capacity to see the problems, to explain them, to debate, to construct and deconstruct the arguments on the other side. An example of everything. What was my big deception? That Latin America, as this was part of a political campaign meant immigration to the United States. The theme was what to do with immigrants. That from a Latin America point of view is a byproduct of a real problem, not the problem in itself. Now, these definitions are important. A time change, you have periods of instability, etc. But you can change some alliances, you can join different groups, and you will have more of the same, like the seasons in a year. Yes, every winter is different. We know a lot here in Boston, but basically they are the same. It's different a time change from an epochal change, where you have a real transformation of the structure of the world, an abrupt or quiet departure from the past that creates enormous uncertainty. And I want to use probably the first phrase in the book that Jorge with two colleagues have edited about the foreign policy of Latin America. There are times for alliances and there are times for alignments. And the phrase is, this is a time for alignment, not for alliances. Please keep that question in your mind when you try to interpret what is going right now in the world. We have here Latin America. These are quotes from Ricardo Lagos, former president of Chile, a very admirable person, and very critical of Latin America. He says the continent is fragmented, focused on internal conflicts, no great regional leaders. The region is absent from the great global debates, no common position about global crisis, the case of Ukraine, for example. We have less regional integration and cooperation, and multilateralism is declining. And multilateralism has been one of the most important points in Latin America. We have been with different results, but always fighting for a better cooperation, a better integration, the formation of regional entities. Now, this is my feeling about this. If the problem, go back to the first two pictures, the Brazil and Chile. If we look to the pictures, we don't see what the pictures meant. We could see, but we could not observe. If we are able to see, we cannot recognize what we are seeing, because that did not happen before in that magnitude. Or if we can recognize it, we cannot really understand what is that. And if we understand, we don't find the words to communicate what is going on. And if we communicate, we cannot agree on an action plan. How many of you have seen Adolescence, the Netflix series? No? Okay, I want to see the hands. Okay, yeah. Don't describe the situation in adolescence. It's terrible when you have something in front of your eyes and you cannot see what is going on. You cannot recognize, you cannot understand, you cannot communicate and you cannot find what to do. The famous Lenin's question, you cannot find an answer for that. So what to do? I would say to see the problem, it needs to appear in our radar. To perceive it, it is not only about economic values. Be careful. People want what they want, they call dignity, respect, liberty, freedom. You cannot measure that with numbers. And our civilization, especially in the Western culture, tries to measure everything by numbers. The most important thing is to be number one. You're the champion. Have you noticed that somebody needs to be number 2 and number 3 and number 4 so you can be number 1? Have you noticed how important they are in your life? You shouldn't be who you are without them. The Patriots, our football team, in one of the seasons was breaking all the records. And they have a lot of records already. And the Super Bowl came, and one of the players was interviewed on TV. And he said, if we don't win the next Sunday, nothing matters. I was thinking, you have 10 records already. That matters. But this is a way of living and of measuring everything by numbers. These people on the streets have a different perception. And when they ask for something and we respond with numbers, we have a clash of communication. It's like talking different languages. Now, when you are talking about values, you are talking about emotions. We know that we live in bubbles. And you have bubbles inside the bubbles. And because of the algorithms, you know that 10 times better, or 100 times better than I do, because of your age. You are digital natives. And you know that you are in this kind of closed world. And the algorithms allows you to receive confirmatory messages of the things that you like to see, the ways you like to think. You don't get access to other ways of seeing the world. So you become a member of a tribe without realizing that you are there. And in these cases of the demonstrations in Latin America, the majority of the people feel like a victim of the system, of the incumbents, of the politicians, etc. Now, what is the result? We need a new social pact. We need different political institutions. We need different public policies. We need moral leadership more than political leadership. We need all of that. But we need to agree in this social pact. We need to create that. One day came to my mind the idea that this new social pact will be made like Wikipedia, with the contribution of every single person. This is not the Encyclopedia Britannica, where a group of experts can write everything and the rest follow. No. Now every single human being wants to put a couple of lines there. So this is in the construction. There are a lot of meetings and panels and things about the threats of the democracy. And that assumes that the democracy is constructed, finished, and somebody is threatening that. I think it is under construction. We are trying to make it better. Anytime I go to an airport and I read the signs, excuse for the inconveniences, we are working for your future, this will be better in a few months, I think this is democracy. We are always trying to improve, to change. So, what to avoid? Simplism. One of the worst things now is people think problems are so easy to solve. Why don't do A, B, and C? And you need to take a couple of classes here to understand that the problems are much more complex than that. But the majority don't go there. Authoritarianism. There's a great professor at the Kennedy School on leadership. Ronald Heifetz was the most polemic professor. 10 years after graduation, when the students were interviewed, what is the class that you remember? Ronnie Heifetz had one of the best remembering grades. The vast majority loved it, and a very important group didn't like it. And he talks about adaptive leadership. And he differentiates the role of an authority from the role of a leader. I will give you just one short example. This person goes to the doctor with a pain in the back. And the doctor says, you have stones on your kidneys. I will remove them. It's a very simple procedure. And in 10 days, you will be working again. And that happened. 10 days later, same patient with the same pain goes to the same doctor and says, doctor, please remove the stones. I have the same problem. She didn't like what she saw. The doctor asks for more exams, and this time she discovers that it was a cancerous tumor. Different situation. Well, the patient asked for 2 different opinions, got them. Unfortunately, they couldn't save his life, gave him the best quality of life, etc. So the question is, what is the difference between case 1 and case 2? The difference is that in the case 1, you know the problem and you know the solution. Any decent doctor can take here the stones from your kidney and you will be okay. Case 2, you don't really know the problem. We know parts of cancer. If we should know what it is, nobody would die of it. So you know partially the solution, and you don't know the solution. You go by trial and error. So people love to have quick fixes. Lower the inflation. There's a problem with the bridge, bring the engineers. There's a problem with the computer, call the IT. Those are technical problems. And the experts can solve them. Those are authorities. But societies have adaptive problems. And adaptive problems do not need managers. They need leaders. And leaders are the people able to think on the spot, receive feedback from reality, analyze the information, make rational guessings, act on them, go back to reality, etc. So situations like the situation we are living now, I think, brings us to there. Timing, it's written there, Jorge. I am not copying you, but it says timing and sequencing is of the utmost importance. Especially if you are managing, timing and sequencing are of the essence. Don't confuse political times with chronological ones. A team from a very important university in the United States came to Ecuador, my country. At that time, they were able to map poverty. They could tell you where the poor are, so you can go there with very direct assistance instead of trying to do things for the whole population that are so ineffective. And I said, you have been invited by the government. I am mayor of Quito, but I want to do that for my city. They said, we can do it. Okay, how much time do you need? A couple of years, and you will have the results. And I said, I have 4 years as mayor. I am already in the second year. If you give me the results in 2 years, I will have 1 year as mayor to implement. And in the last year is the most difficult one because you have elections, you have different expectations. So don't confuse chronological times with political times. Many times you say, no, don't do this now, wait. And you are assuming that the situation will not change. Look at Argentina right now. President Milei, in his campaign, said he was going to dollarize the economy. That means to adopt the US dollar as the currency of the country. And later, they made the conclusion that you need to produce a lot of reforms before you cannot just do it like that. Well, the question is how much political capital you have. When you come to power, you come like when you have your banking account. So in that account, you make deposits and you draw checks. Politics is the same. You start governing, you can put capital if things are going well, or you start drawing immediately. And the question is, do you have the political capital to make important changes the moment you want? Or you have to be very attentive to the timing to find the opportunities and grasp the opportunity and do it, because probably it will not come again. Statecraft is essential. You need to construct with your hands the coalitions, the alliances, the programs, the actions, the implementation. This is the art of politics, to make things happen. Usually we say politics is the art of the possible. Probably you have heard that expression. And I like more another one. Politics is the art to make possible what it is necessary. And that is statecraft. Okay, now what are the context after COVID, as Jorge mentioned, and right now? This is a reality that didn't happen before. China. Just to give you one example. Between 1997 and 2002, 10 presidents in Latin America couldn't finish their terms. From the Caribe to the Patagonia. They have one thing in common: economic crisis. From 2002 and 2007, 8, only 2 presidents had problems. One in Honduras and one in Paraguay. And they didn't have problems related to the economy. Why? Because in those years, we have this boom in the commodities. The prices went to the sky. When I was president, the price of a barrel of oil was $7 per barrel. 10 years later, it was 140. It is very easy to be president when you have the money in your hands. It is a problem to administer poverty. Okay, but why the prices went up? Because of China. They appeared in the market and started buying anything we produce in Latin America. Every country was exporting at very good prices, so the economies boomed. Now, look at the future. I was always following the instruction for try to see this in the future. Andrés Malamud is a political scientist from Argentina. I follow him. I really like him. He says that by the year 2050, only 45% of the population of the United States will identify itself as white. It's a shock. By the end of this century, China will have 700 million less people, half of the population. Africa will be the most populated continent in the world. Can you imagine what will happen with all this population growth in Africa, with a strait of this size between them and Europe? What will happen with immigration? Are we thinking about that, preparing about that? The economy. In 2050, this is in Jorge's book, 7 out of the 10 largest economies in the world will be non-Western countries. This is a change of epoch. This is not a change of time. And China has the Belt and Road Initiative in 140 countries out of 190 countries that are in the world. We have been talking about one side of the equation, Latin America. Now we have to talk about the other side, Trump 2.0. And he won big, won the delegates, won the popular vote, won the majority in Congress. Has very powerful allies. That makes him one of the most powerful presidents in history. This time, in his second presidency, he came with a very clear idea of what he wanted to accomplish. Difference with the Trump 1.0, when he came to some extent to learn what was going on. Works with a sense of urgency. Those weeks that look like decades. He has an arsenal of tools that he likes to use. Tariffs is the most well-known now. And there are a lot of global problems that do not seem to appear in his agenda. Climate change, he has been denying that the problem exists. And narco-trafficking, they recognize that the problem exists, but I am not sure that the definition of the problem and the solution is correct. And the other problems are in the fight between the two emperors in the world now. The emperor of the West, the United States, and the emperor of the East, China. Those phrases sound like taken from Game of Thrones. His approach to problems is more transactional than relational. In The Art of the Deal, the book he published in which he explains how he approached these problems, He says, some people write poetry, some people paint. My art is the deal, is to get a result, is to negotiate. That's how he sees himself. Now look at this. This was in the year 2000, 25 years ago. All the blue states depend on the United States, or has the United States as the most important commercial partner. What happens today? Remember, it's happening in front of our eyes. And for many years, we didn't see the problem. And now we see it, we cannot be so blind. And we don't know how to explain it or what to do. A big question about the tariffs is if there is a real plan behind that, or is more like trial and error to see what happens. I was thinking a lot about what to say about the specific problems right now. And I found a problem. Things change from the morning to the afternoon. This will be recorded. This will be on the web. Probably in 3 days, whatever we are going to say about that will not be important anymore because things changed. What I found is a lot of confusion everywhere. In every single office, political offices, private offices, exporters, they are watching the TV and trying to find documents to see what happens with the tariffs for tomorrow. And they decided to wait and see, like in the Westerns. In the final scene of the Westerns, John Wayne is fighting against the bad guys, and everybody shoots at the same time. And you don't know what happened. What do? Wait to see the blood. The blood tells you who was hit. And I feel this in the atmosphere now. I was in Dominican Republic like last week. They didn't know what to do. One minister told me that the ambassador of a very important European country talked to him and said, maybe we can imagine to produce this thing using these containers from the United States, and if we do that, maybe we can get a loop and then turn into that loop, and that will change the tariff, etc. So nobody's clear about anything. So I hope that soon we will have more certainty about that. Now, what makes a crisis? A crisis is made of 3 things. 1, the stakes are so big. I remember Peru and Ecuador, we were going to enter into a new war. So the stakes are between death and life. You cannot have greater stakes. Second, the uncertainty is enormous. You have to make decisions with the information you have. The information can be inaccurate, partialized, wrong, but that is what you have. You cannot wait forever to make a decision. I love case studies because everything comes very well organized and is necessary for your decision to make. So the second is the information. And the third one is a sense of urgency. You need to decide for tomorrow. So big stakes, sense of urgency, and uncertainty make the crisis. In the case of Latin America, you cannot talk about Latin America as a unified actor. Remember the last. Look, from the Andean countries to the north, we are depending on the United States. The rest are much more connected to China. In those countries, you can have completely different situations depending on the president, the ideology, the party, the products they export, the relationship with the president of the United States. But those things can change. A good relation today can be a bad relation tomorrow. So let's see, I will conclude saying this. What we want as a continent from this country. First, we would like to have clear rules of the game. Please, American governments, have one foreign policy for Latin America. Decide and try to maintain it. And yes, you have elections, and elections are for changing policies. I understand that. But if you analyze what happened during President Biden's presidency with Venezuela, for example, you had so many different changes in a very short period of time that I mean by we, former presidents of the region that had many meetings, couldn't understand what was going on and what to do. So one foreign policy for the region. Second, if we decide one course of action, let's keep it, let's respect it. And Latin America cannot accept to choose from China or the United States. This is completely impossible. We have very good relationships, commercial relationships with both of them. It would be crazy to say you have to close your relationships if you want to continue with us. I don't want to enter into all the problems of the tariffs because there are so many brilliant analyses of people that really know about the theme. I am not one of them. So I would love to be more like a manager and have the technical solution, the technical fix. But I am very confused. I am part of the people that are still collecting information to try to figure out what to do. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. We'll now open the floor for questions. I have many myself, but I will refrain from positing. Please. And I'm particularly interested in questions from our students. We have a mic. Daniel, do you have a mic?
Yeah.
Sorry. Yes, go ahead.
Yeah.
Please identify yourself.
Oh, hi. I'm an undergraduate student at BU. My question is, many Latin American countries have faced the challenge of balancing currency stability with economic autonomy. So in retrospect, what are some long-term insights, like positive or cautionary, that you would share from Ecuador's experience with dollarization?
I would say that the economic fate of Latin American governments are based on two important things. The first one are the exports. So the price of the commodities that many times depend on the market, the international market, and not on the country itself, are determinant. The example I gave you of China during those years is one of them. And the second one is the interest rate in the United States. On both situations, we are forced to accept whatever the markets decide. Why is so important the interest rate? Because the external debt that we have is so enormous that the change in the rate forces you to pay much more every year if the interests go up. And that change, the country risk, you have heard the expression. That means if the risk of your country is higher, on top of the interest rate for everybody, you have to put a premium because you are too risky to invest in you. Yeah? So those are the two most important variables. When I was president, the two variables that defined what the government will do were external debt and what percentage of your budget is dedicated to buy weapons because of the international problem with Peru. Any president came to Ecuador and you had like 90% of the budget already assigned. You can be a communist or an extreme capitalist. You have to pay salaries to public servants. You have to serve education, etc., etc. You have a very small amount of the budget to try to do something different according to your ideology. So the commodity prices and interest rates are the two most important variables in my experience.
Thank you so much for coming to VU. One of my questions is based off one of your slides. So you mentioned about the need for to bring like a new democracy to Latin America in general. But one of my questions, at least from the Mexican perspective, is how does that look like? You cite new political institutions, public policies, and I think Mexico, in a certain sense, reflects that. But at the same time, the new, let's say, front is comprised of a majority, at least at the state level, of actors from the previous party, to say the least. So, how can, like, I guess, our generation kind of confront this idea or this demand and desire of a new democracy, and yet kind of only have the options of rebranding the previous one?
Let me ask you a question. Try to help me, and then I will answer. Let's imagine that you enter into politics. Let's imagine that you win an election, and you need to form your government. Can be mayor, can be president. How do you choose the people to work with you, based on your experience?
From observations of other governments or personal experience?
Personal.
Personally, I feel like I would lean more towards the technocratic approach and look at universities and experts and economists and choose that crowd rather than going to the previous establishment and picking off of that.
Mm-hmm. And how do you know those people?
Through Pardee, I guess. But I can't say I have a personal relationship with any of these people.
Uh-huh. It's so interesting because what happened before? You have these things called political parties. You enter into a political party very young, you grow there, you go to seminars, you are educated, you are guided by experts, you create a force that work together, and then if you win an election, you have your own base of friends and compañeros where to choose from. Now, this is a conversation with some friends, former presidents. Many of them say the moment when we had political parties. Now we don't have that. So where is the raw material for this? And that sounds to me more like an exercise of nostalgia than a real plan. Because if you or your friends spent a lot of hours in the social networks, the hours that we spent before with the groups, probably you will get from there a lot of help. You know somebody is an influencer here or is an author there, and you pick them to help. Infobae is probably the most important information, I don't know, outlet, chain, I don't know how to call it. And his founder, a very great journalist, said the next president of Argentina will come from the social media. And I believe he's right. Now, How do you create a government if that is the environment? You need to figure out different methods. Critics, you cannot explain things in 140 characters. You cannot explain problems in 60-second sound bites. However, if I want to reach you because you're a voter, I have to accommodate to you, not the other way around. If I pretend that you come to a 1-hour talk, every time I need to connect you, you will come once or twice, no more. So all these methods, all these ways of thinking, all these ways of gathering are changing so fast that or we go there to build from there a new democracy, or we will get on the side and will be surpassed by the dynamic of the events. That's what I meant. Then the rest are values that I hope will not change. Respect, human rights, democracy, etc., etc.
Hello, I'm a student here at Pardee. My name is Buja. Hi, Professor Heine. I had a question about the current administration regrettably expressed attitudes regarding taking back the Panama Canal. So I wanted to ask, what effect would those have on diplomatic relations, say, between regional economic powers in Latin America, or even countries like China that have a greater stake in Latin America? So how do you predict that?
We loved in Latin America multilateralism. We wanted to sign a lot of documents and to behave according to the rules that we agreed. The current administration says we don't like multilateralism. We want to negotiate country to country, one to one by one. Of course, we felt always that if we are together, we have more leverage the moment to negotiate. Probably that was just an aspiration, but we believe that. Now, one-to-one, you have to solve many problems. And that is going to be a big change. Even with the European Union. If with Europe, they are proposing that and changing things, imagine with small countries that doesn't have that power. The difference basically with China during many years is that China is very commercially oriented. If you want a program with financing from the United States, even Europe, they would say human rights. We don't want the child labor. We will pay attention to the origin of your materials, etc. China never asks those questions. Here's the money, here's the project, you can start tomorrow. And that is part of the explanation about how they grew so fast. Now you have to see the consequences. How many of those credits are possible to recuperate? How many countries are going to pay for that? But look, in the 1950s, after World War II, the United States played that role. There's a great book. I think the title is Understanding Development, written by a Colombian author. And he says, after the war, we saw these people in Latin America that were living with less than $2 per day. For they, that was a way of living. They called that life. But they were categorized as poor. So suddenly, what was daily life became poverty. And based on the decisions on Bretton Woods that created all the organizations, they decided that poverty was an illness, so you need to understand the illness, study the illness, prepare doctors to cure the illness, prepare medicines to cure the illness, finance all of that, create local branches in every country of the good ideas, bring the best minds from the countries to study in good universities to be prepared, and then ask them to go back to the countries to administer the medicine, etc. So that was the philosophy. And in all that process, our voice was very small. Very small. We were not consulted. We were more told what to do. Now, in the 1950s, if there was a problem, an airport, a road, etc., usually you will have an American company that has the technical expertise, and you have some American institution that could finance the project. That's the way we developed this infrastructure. Latin America disappeared from the radar screen of the United States, especially after September 11. We disappeared. It seemed like you have to create real problems to be taken into account. And this is a law of physics. If you produce an empty space, somebody will occupy that. And that somebody was enormous. The name is China. So they came and they offered the same thing that the Americans were offering in the 1950s. Even easier. What is the next step? That is the question. I would love to have the answer.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
Hi, my name is Gladys. I'm also Ecuadorian, and my parents wanted to be here today to speak to you, but they couldn't. But they did send me to ask you some questions. I was hoping you could answer about like the time during your administration. Specifically, they were asking about the reasoning behind moving, like dollarizing Ecuador, but you had answered that with the interest rates and external debt and money towards weapons. But they also had questions as to how that related to closing down banks and creating like a federalized bank. Like,
any economy in the world needs an anchor. And usually an anchor is what we call monetary policy. So the Federal Reserve here, or the central banks in the countries, decide how much money to print for the functioning of the economy. Sometimes, for some circumstances, that is not a possible anchor, because you need to print more money. Let's say you have a war. So the priority of the country is the war, so you do not follow the most strict monetary policies. Then you can try to do the second anchor, which is fiscal policy. You try to stabilize the country, controlling the expenditures of the government. Sometimes the second anchor is not possible. Depends on each country, on each circumstance. And that was the situation of Ecuador. So we had an enormous devaluation. The sucre devalued 40% in 20 days. And we were left completely alone by the international community. We had a combination of 2 or 3 problems. First, El Niño. You have heard of El Niño. El Niño flooded the country. 81% of the exports were coming from bananas, shrimp, fishery, and oil. So El Niño destroyed the first 3. And the oil price went to $7 per barrel. What happens with the price of the dollar in your countries if you suddenly do not have dollars because you are not exporting because of these problems? If you don't have supply and the demand is increasing, what happens with the price of any product? Exactly, goes up. And that happened with the dollar. Now the dollar is connected to inflation because the price is reflected in the prices of the goodies. And in those moments, usually the countries got loans because this is a temporary problem, El Niño. In 1 year, you will be exporting again. But in that moment was the moment of the East Asia crisis. Remember 97, 98? You have problems in Malaysia, Indonesia, etc. And because of that, the banks closed the doors. So you couldn't get a bridge loan to overcome this problem. And the situation was desperate. So the only way out was to get a program with the International Monetary Fund. And the fund was changing the policies, changing the way to understand problems, and we couldn't get a cent. And the situation was desperate. So I didn't campaign saying I am going to dollarize the economy. It was not my original plan. I wanted a just structural adjustment. But when I didn't have any other option, I had to study very different alternatives. I remember President John Kennedy, his boat, a small boat in World War II was sunk by the Japanese. And he was swimming, very good swimmer. He went to an island and helped 2 other soldiers, and he was decorated as a war hero because of that. And one day he was asked, how did you become a war hero? And he answered, the Japanese sank my boat. Without that, that would not have happened. So in my case, if I could have got a program with IMF, probably I would have followed the path of any other Latin American country. But I didn't have a cent. So decided to dollarize the economy against the opinion of the IMF, against the opinion of the majority of the macroeconomists of Ecuador. The people wanted solutions. They didn't know exactly what, but they wanted solutions. And now, 25 years later, 95% of the population of Ecuador doesn't want to hear about abandoning the dollar and creating another currency. So thank God it worked. But you always take risks. But you ask the people to vote for you and to elect you to make decisions. You don't want to be there to pass the problem to another person. In a book I wrote about leadership, I found a great quote from Maradona, the soccer player. Maradona said, when I received the ball, I confronted, I went forward, I searched the goal. I could shoot outside the goal or make a goal, but I was never receiving the ball and looking how to give the responsibility to another player. And that is great for politics. If you ask them to elect you, do your job. You have to pay a price. I closed my inauguration speech with a serenity prayer. The Lord give me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change. Because you are a human being. Don't believe you can change the world. No, forget about that. So, serenity for that, to accept your limitations. Second, give me the courage to change the things I can. And give me your wisdom to understand the difference. Because for me, everything is there in those 3 lines. Now, what is courage? We use the word frequently. And I remember a conversation from Socrates, the philosopher, and the general from Sparta. Remembering in ancient Greece, the philosophers came from Athens, and the generals came from Sparta. And Socrates asked the general, "What is courage, general?" And the general said, "Courage means always going forward and never coming back." Okay, said Socrates. Now, let's imagine that you had entered into a very narrow path in the mountain, and you discover, one, that there's no way out. Second, you have been ambushed, and they are going to kill your troop. What would you do? The only way out is to go back. And the general, with the same assertiveness, said, "I would order to go back, because the first responsibility of a general is to protect the lives of his men." And Socrates said the obvious. To fulfill your duty as a general, you will be practicing cowardice, because you are not going forward, you are going back. And the story is that the general jumped to Socrates to kill him. And Socrates said, "No, general, I think you are doing the right thing." And this is the pearl. Because courage is the obedience to a serene judgment. It's beautiful. A serene judgment is much more than rational analysis. We have four bodies: physical, rational, emotional, and energetic, spiritual. How you call it as you want. And the combination of the four makes us who we are. So the serene judgment takes into account the four information. And then when you decide that you have to do something, you notice the price that you are going to pay for that. And many times you say, "I don't want to pay that price. Somebody else can do it." And many good decisions for countries are not implemented because of that. So I came to the personal conviction that dollarization was the response to a serene judgment, and face everything. For making those decisions, last week I had the 25th anniversary of living in Boston.
Congratulations.
Well, let me finish.
Sorry.
For 25 years, I had not been able to go back to my country.
I'm sorry about that.
Okay? So, the obedience to a serene judgment has a price. But as a Mexican friend told me once, any important decision, and this is very good, especially for you, you have the whole life to make decisions in front of you. Any important decision invites you to choose between sleeping well or eating well. If you align yourself with your internal GPS and make decisions based on your values, and do not betray yourself, you will sleep well. And most probably you will eat well, not the other way around.
Hello, my name is Valeria. Thank you for coming out today and giving an amazing lecture. My question wanted to focus on the ongoing problems in Latin America today. I'm from Peru, and there's a big crisis right now with extortionists all over the country, especially in Lima, and then gangs all over controlling towns and cities. People have been protesting regarding that and the change of administration, or they want to change an administration. But I see that it is a problem all throughout. I recently saw that the current president of Ecuador is looking to try to get the US or Europe to help for tackling gangs and stuff. And we have seen the extreme on one end in El Salvador on how to tackle those issues. But I was wondering if there was more of a multilateral way to tackle this growing problem that is hurting the lives of innocent people in our country.
Thank you, Valerie. Yeah. The situation that is most talked about in relation to Peru is how the country is in this enormous turmoil for so many years in the political side, and the economy is going pretty well. How can you combine those things? In the case of Peru, that works. The country was able to isolate the economic management of the country from the political fight, terrible fights. Okay. Second, you have touched what for me is the most important problem of Latin America, narco-traffic, and the links between narco-traffickers and political parties and elections. We are talking basically about cocaine. If you imagine the countries, in the case of Ecuador, we are with Colombia in the north and Peru in the south, and we are not connected with Bolivia. But more than 90% of the cocaine in the world is produced in those three countries. So they need to export. We do not produce, but our shores are very easy to access, and you can send small boats with the coca there to the Pacific Oceans where other boats take it. So we became the place through which you can export coca. And we are paying an enormous price in violence, people dying, killed on the streets. The violence in Ecuador is as never before. And before that, we were called the island of peace in the America, because we didn't have guerrillas, etc. How do you combat that? An estimation is that the business of coca represents $300 billion per year. That is more than the GDP of almost any country except 2 or 3, the big ones. How do you combat that? They have organization, money, all the money in the world, arms. They have systems, methods. They have persons planted in each country, and they cooperate. So if you do not produce something like that to counterbalance it, you are lost. Narco-traffic is an international problem, needs an international operation, needs the collaboration of many countries, because that's the only way to fight. Now, if you are on the side of the narco-traffickers, and many people live very well because of that, you should say, I don't want foreigners or I don't want other countries entering into my country. But that's the best way to serve the narco-traffickers, converting into a political thing what seems to be a logical plan to have any chance of success. And we are doing that now. Look, we have elections in Ecuador this weekend, the second round for president. The two most important issues are, one, dollarization. 25 years later, one candidate says, I will get out of the dollarization. Then they say, no, we will protect the dollarization, because they started losing votes. But this is one theme. And the other theme is the narco-traffic. The government will confront firmly them, or will make some kind of arrangements with some of the bands to try to keep the violence low. Those are the two things that we are deciding on Sunday.
Thank you.
Very good. Thank you so much. Please join me in thanking President Mahuad for his wonderful...
Thank you.